You wake up every Tuesday morning to find your trash scattered across your pristine driveway like confetti from hell.
Coffee grounds painting abstract art on your concrete.
Banana peels creating slip hazards that would make lawyers salivate. And your neighbors giving you those judgmental looks that could freeze lava. But here's the kicker. You know exactly who's doing it. And she's standing right across the street with a smile, so fake it could be made in China. Meet Karen Henderson, age 52, HOA board member, and part-time neighborhood terrorist. This woman had turned trash can terrorism into an art form, and I was her unwilling canvas. Every single week, like clockwork, my bins would be mysteriously toppled over exactly 37 minutes after the garbage truck left. How do I know this? Because after the third incident, I started timing everything like I was planning a heist. Karen wasn't just your garden variety HOA busybody. Oh no, this woman had elevated petty tyranny to Olympic levels. She measured grass heights with rulers she carried in her purse, documented every minor violation with the dedication of a war correspondent, and had somehow memorized every subsection of our homeowners' agreement like it was sacred scripture. The woman probably dreamed in HOA regulation numbers, but the trash can situation? That was personal. It started innocently enough. I had moved into Willowbrook Estate 6 months earlier, attracted by the promise of a peaceful suburban paradise, where the biggest drama would be whose turn it was to host the block party. The houses were cookie-cutter perfect, lawns manicured to golf course standards, and the HOA promised to maintain property values with the vigilance of Fort Knox guards. What they didn't mention in the welcome packet was Karen. My first encounter with her happened on my very first trash day. I had carefully positioned my bins according to the HOA guidelines, 18 inches from the curb, lids facing the street, positioned between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. only. I had read those rules more carefully than my own mortgage documents,
highlighting important passages like I was studying for the bar exam.
I watched from my kitchen window as the garbage truck completed its route around 9:30 a.m., perfect execution. Bins emptied, truck departed, neighborhood returning to its suburban zen. I grabbed my coffee and headed out to retrieve the empty containers, feeling pretty good about nailing my first trash day in the new neighborhood. That's when I saw her. Karen was power walking down the sidewalk in workout gear that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, so tight it could have been classified as a facelift, and she was staring at my trash bins like they had personally insulted her mother. She stopped directly in front of my driveway, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures. Not just casual snapshots. This woman was conducting a full photographic investigation, circling my bins like a CSI tech documenting a crime scene, close-ups of the positioning, wide shots of the street placement, even artistic angles that would have made Ansel Adams jealous. The whole performance took nearly 5 minutes. I stepped outside, thinking maybe there was some welcome wagon tradition I didn't know about. Or perhaps she was documenting the neighborhood for some community newsletter. Innocent times, when I still believed in the basic decency of suburban civilization. Good morning, I called out cheerfully, walking down my driveway with my coffee mug in hand. I'm Dave, just moved in last week. Beautiful neighborhood you have here. Karen looked up from her phone with the expression of someone who had just discovered gum on their designer shoes. Her eyes swept over me with the clinical efficiency of a security scanner, taking inventory of everything from my slightly wrinkled t-shirt to my mismatched socks. Karen Henderson, HOA Compliance Officer, she announced, like she was introducing herself at a war crimes tribunal. I'm conducting a routine inspection of trash, receptacle positioning, and compliance with community standards. Compliance officer. Not board member, not neighbor, not even community volunteer. Compliance officer. Like she was running a minimum security prison instead of a suburban development where the most exciting event was usually Mrs. Patterson's weekly garden club meetings. Oh, sure, I replied, still maintaining my optimistic newcomer attitude. Did I mess something up? I tried to follow all the guidelines in the packet. Karen's smile could have powered a small town. If you could harness passive aggression as an energy source. Well, Mr. Miller, while your bins are technically within acceptable parameters, I noticed they're positioned at exactly 18 inches from the curb. I waited for the problem to reveal itself, but apparently this was supposed to be self-evident. The guidelines specify 18 inches minimum, I said slowly, wondering if I had somehow misunderstood basic English. Precisely, minimum. Most residents position their bins at 20 to 24 inches, showing proper respect for community aesthetics and street appeal. 18 inches, while technically compliant, suggests a certain disregard for the spirit of our community standards. I stared at this woman, trying to process what I was hearing. She was criticizing me for following the rules too literally. It was like getting a speeding ticket for driving exactly the speed limit because most people drive 5 over. I see, I said. Because what else do you say to someone who has clearly weaponized homeowners association guidelines? I'll keep that in mind for next week. I certainly hope so, Karen replied, snapping one final photo of my perfectly compliant trash bins. We take great pride in maintaining the highest standards here at Willowbrook Estates. I'm sure you understand. She power walked away with the satisfied air of someone who had just saved civilization from the chaos of properly followed regulations. I stood there in my driveway, coffee getting cold, wondering what exactly I had gotten myself into. The following Tuesday, I positioned my bins at 22 inches from the curb. Split the difference, show some community spirit, keep the peace. I even double-checked the measurement with my tape measure like I was installing crown molding. Perfect positioning, perfect timing, perfect compliance with both the written rules and the unwritten Karen code. Wednesday morning, I woke up to what looked like a garbage bomb had detonated in my driveway. Both bins were overturned, their contents spread across the concrete with the precision of someone who had clearly thought this through. This wasn't random vandalism or wind damage. This was strategic chaos. Orange peels had been artfully arranged near my flower beds. Coffee grounds created Jackson Pollock patterns across my driveway. And a week's worth of junk mail had been distributed with the care of someone seeding a lawn. The bins themselves were positioned upside down at the far end of my driveway, like twin monuments to suburban warfare. I stood there in my bathrobe and slippers, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, trying to process the scene. My first thought was teenagers. Maybe some bored high schoolers had decided to make Tuesday night more interesting by decorating the neighborhood with garbage. It happened in suburbs across America every day. But as I started cleaning up the mess, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints, clear impressions in the soft dirt near my flower bed where the morning sprinkler system had created perfect tracking conditions. Small feet, probably size 7 or 8 women's shoes, with a distinctive tread pattern that looked like expensive athletic wear. The same footprints led directly to the sidewalk and disappeared in the direction of Karen's house. I spent 45 minutes cleaning up the mess, scrubbing coffee stains off my concrete, and fishing produce stickers out of my landscaping. The whole time I kept glancing across the street at Karen's house, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that she might be watching her handiwork. Sure enough, as I was hosing down the last of the mess, I caught a glimpse of a curtain moving in her front window. Just a flutter, barely perceptible, but enough to confirm what I already suspected. Karen was enjoying the show. The next week I decided to test my theory. I set up a small security camera in my garage, angled to capture my driveway and the street beyond. But here's where it got truly diabolical. Karen didn't just tip over the bins and run. Oh no, this woman had technique. She carefully opened each lid, examined the contents like she was conducting an archaeological excavation, and then strategically distributed the garbage for maximum visual impact and cleanup difficulty. She placed heavier items near my car to ensure I'd have to move them before backing out. She scattered smaller, debris-in patterns that would require individual pickup rather than simple sweeping. She even separated recyclables from regular trash and redistributed them to create maximum sorting confusion. This wasn't random vandalism. This was psychological warfare conducted with the precision of a military operation. The whole performance took nearly 20 minutes, during which Karen occasionally paused to admire her work, like Michelangelo stepping back from the Sistine Chapel. When she finished, she actually brushed off her hands with satisfaction before skulking back across the street to her house. I sat in my kitchen the next morning, watching this footage on repeat, feeling a mixture of vindication and complete disbelief. Here was a grown woman, a pillar of the community, a homeowners association board member, conducting midnight raids on her neighbor's garbage, like some kind of refuse-based terrorist. But having proof and doing something about it were two entirely different problems. Going to the police seemed excessive. "Officer, my neighbor keeps knocking over my trash cans," wasn't exactly a call that would mobilize the SWAT team. The HOA was obviously compromised since Karen was part of the leadership. Confronting her directly would only escalate the situation and probably result in her finding new, creative ways to make my life miserable, so I decided to fight fire with fire. If Karen wanted to play games, I was going to give her a game she'd never forget. The next Tuesday, I implemented phase 1 of my counter strategy. Instead of putting out regular trash bins, I filled them with carefully curated decoy garbage. Shredded newspaper soaked in bacon grease to create maximum mess and smell. Empty cans filled with glitter that would explode in spectacular fashion when disturbed. Plastic containers filled with biodegradable confetti that would create cleanup. Nightmares without causing environmental damage. I positioned my camera and waited. Karen's 2 a.m. raid proceeded exactly as expected, right up until she opened the first bin. The glitter explosion was visible even in the night vision footage, creating a sparkly cloud that engulfed her like a disco ball had detonated. The bacon grease newspaper immediately began adhering to her dark clothing, creating patterns that looked like abstract art painted by a toddler having a tantrum. The confetti containers provided the grand finale, covering Karen in thousands of tiny paper circles that clung to the bacon, grease like colorful barnacles on a ship's hull. Watching Karen try to clean herself off while simultaneously dealing with the mess she had created was better than anything Netflix had ever produced. She attempted to brush off the glitter, which only spread it around like fairy dust applied with a paint roller. She tried to shake off the confetti, which had formed strategic alliances with the bacon grease and refused to abandon ship. The whole situation devolved into what could only be described as a one-woman interpretive dance performance titled Suburban Revenge, a glittery tragedy in one act. After about 10 minutes of increasingly frantic cleanup attempts, Karen finally retreated to her house looking like she had lost a fight with a craft store that had been having an explosion sale. I thought this might end the trash can wars. Surely no reasonable person would continue this nonsense after being thoroughly pranked into submission. Karen was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She had to know that I knew it was her, and she had to realize that I was prepared to escalate this situation in ways that would make both our lives increasingly ridiculous. I was wrong. The next week, Karen skipped her usual Tuesday night raid but showed up Wednesday evening instead, clearly trying to throw off my timing. Unfortunately for her, my security camera ran on motion detection, not a schedule. This time she came prepared. Karen had upgraded her operation with protective gear that would have been impressive if it wasn't being used for garbage terrorism. Disposable coveralls, rubber gloves, safety goggles, and what appeared to be a painter's respirator mask. She looked like she was preparing to clean up a chemical spill rather than knock over some trash cans. More importantly, she had brought reinforcements. Karen wasn't alone this time. She had recruited her husband, Bob, into her crusade against my refuse receptacles. Bob Henderson was a mild-mannered accountant who usually spent his free time tending to their award-winning rose garden and reading financial newspapers. Seeing him suited up in matching protective gear while preparing to assault my garbage was like watching Mr. Rogers join a motorcycle gang. The two of them approached my driveway with the tactical coordination of a SEAL team, communicating through hand signals that they had clearly practiced. Karen pointed to the first bin. Bob nodded gravely, and they began their operation with military precision. But I had anticipated escalation. This week's decoy trash included motion-activated speakers hidden in the bins, programmed to play various sound effects when disturbed. The first bin, when opened, immediately began broadcasting the sound of a car alarm at maximum volume. Karen and Bob's carefully planned operation immediately descended into chaos as they found themselves conducting psychological warfare against garbage cans that were fighting back with weapons-grade audio torture. Bob actually fell backward onto my lawn, his safety goggles askew, looking like he was having existential crisis about how his life had led him to this exact moment. Karen, however, was made of sterner stuff. She pressed forward with the determination of someone who had committed too much to back down now, even as the combination of car alarms and crying babies created a soundscape that probably violated several Geneva Convention protocols. The whole neighborhood started turning on lights as the audio chaos continued. Porch lights flickered on like Christmas decorations, and I could see faces appearing in windows up and down the street as my quiet, suburban development transformed into an avant-garde performance. Art installation. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down actually came outside in her bathrobe to investigate, took one look at Karen and Bob wrestling with screaming trash cans, and retreated back inside with the speed of someone who had decided that whatever was happening was none of her business and she wanted to keep it that way. Eventually, Karen managed to silence the first bin by closing the lid and sitting on it like she was trying to contain a particularly aggressive jack-in-the-box. Bob, meanwhile, was still sprawled on my lawn, staring at the sky with the 1,000-yard stare of a man questioning all his life choices.
Robert,
Karen hissed through her respirator mask. which muffled her voice and made her sound like Darth Vader having an allergic reaction. "Get up and help me with this." Bob slowly climbed to his feet, brushed grass stains off his coveralls, and approached the second bin with all the enthusiasm of someone walking to their own execution. When he opened the lid, the crying baby sounds hit him like an audio freight train, causing him to stumble backward and trip over my garden hose with a grace that would have made physical comedians weep with envy. At this point, even Karen seemed to realize that her midnight garbage raids had evolved beyond any reasonable scope of neighborhood dispute. She looked around at the chaos, her husband tangled in garden equipment, half the neighborhood awake and watching, 2 trash cans that sounded like they were hosting auditions for a horror movie soundtrack, and finally began to grasp that maybe, just maybe, she had escalated this situation beyond any rational proportion. But Karen Henderson was not a woman who backed down from anything, especially when she had committed this much time and energy to a cause. Quitting now would be admitting defeat. And Karen's DNA had been specifically engineered to reject defeat, like a body rejecting a bad organ transplant. She spent the next week regrouping, planning, and apparently consulting with other HOA board members because suddenly I started receiving official violation notices for infractions, so creative they belonged in a modern art museum. My mailbox was positioned 3/4 of an inch, too far to the left of the approved placement zone. My garden mulch was distributed in patterns that allegedly violated aesthetic guidelines that weren't written anywhere, but apparently existed in Karen's imagination. Even my doormat was cited for being aggressively rectangular in a neighborhood that supposedly favored organic geometric forms. Each violation notice came with professional letterhead, official language that would have impressed law school professors, and fines that started at $50 and escalated exponentially for repeat offenses. Karen had weaponized bureaucracy with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this exact scenario for years. The doormat violation was particularly impressive in its creative overreach. According to the official notice, my simple brown coconut fiber mat created visual discord that disrupts the harmonious flow of streetscape aesthetics, established through careful community planning and design oversight. Apparently, my doormat was conducting psychological warfare against the neighborhood's feng shui. I spent an entire evening researching HOA law, diving into legal precedents and community regulations like I was preparing for oral arguments before the Supreme Court. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Homeowners associations wielded power that would make dictators jealous, and challenging their authority required documentation, persistence, and lawyer-level attention to detail. But Karen had made one critical mistake in her escalation strategy. By generating official violation notices for obviously ridiculous infractions, she had created a paper trail that documented her vendetta with the precision of a courtroom transcript. Every citation, every fine, every creative interpretation of community guidelines was now officially recorded in HOA documentation. More importantly, I had started attending HOA board meetings. Willowbrook Estates held monthly meetings in the community center, a beige building that looked like it had been designed by someone who had only heard architecture described secondhand. These gatherings typically attracted 12 to 15 residents, most of whom showed up because they had received violation notices and wanted to dispute them in person. Karen ran these meetings with the iron fist of someone who had confused homeowners association governance with running a fascist state. She sat at the head of a folding table, armed with a gavel that she used with the enthusiasm of Thor wielding Mjolnir, and conducted business according to Robert's rules of order, interpreted through the lens of someone who had clearly missed the point of democratic participation. The first meeting I attended was a master class in petty authoritarianism. Karen read violation summaries with the dramatic flair of someone announcing war crimes, complete with photographic evidence, projected on a screen that made everyone's minor infractions look like they threatened the very foundations of civilized society. Item 7, Karen announced, consulting her notes like she was reading a military briefing. 17 Maple Street. Unauthorized lawn ornament placement, creating visual pollution in direct violation of Section 4.2b of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines. The violation in question was a small garden gnome. A garden gnome. Mrs. Chen, the homeowner in question, had placed a 4-inch ceramic gnome near her mailbox, and somehow this had been classified as a threat to community standards that required official intervention. The gnome has been positioned in clear view of street traffic, Karen continued, clicking to a photo that showed the tiny figure standing innocently among Mrs. Chen's petunias, creating a whimsical aesthetic that disrupts the sophisticated ambiance we've worked so hard to cultivate in our community. Mrs. Chen, who was probably 80 years old and had the patience of someone who had survived decades of dealing with unreasonable people, raised her hand politely. Karen, dear, it's just a little garden gnome. My granddaughter gave it to me. Karen's expression suggested that Mrs. Chen had just admitted to trafficking illegal narcotics across international borders. Mrs. Chen, I understand the sentimental value, but community standards exist for everyone's benefit. Once we start making exceptions for personal attachments, where does it end? Garden gnomes today, pink flamingos tomorrow, and before you know it, we're living in a neighborhood that looks like a roadside attraction. The slippery slope from garden gnomes to community destruction was apparently steeper than anyone had realized. I watched this exchange with growing fascination and horror, beginning to understand that Karen's vendetta against my trash cans was part of a much larger campaign to control every visible aspect of neighborhood life with the micromanaging intensity of someone who had confused community leadership with running a totalitarian state. But Mrs. Chen's garden gnome had given me an idea. If Karen wanted to wage war through official channels, I was going to arm myself with the most powerful weapon available in suburban combat: malicious compliance. I spent the following week studying our community guidelines with the dedication of a constitutional scholar preparing for a Supreme Court case. I read every subsection, memorized every clause, and discovered something beautiful. The rules were written so broadly that they could be interpreted in ways that would make Karen's life very interesting. The guidelines specified that all outdoor decorations must maintain community aesthetic standards and contribute to neighborhood visual harmony. They required that landscaping choices complement the established architectural theme, and that any modifications to property appearance be submitted for review and approval. What they didn't specify was exactly what constituted aesthetic, harmony, or architectural theme complement. These were subjective terms that could be interpreted by anyone with sufficient creativity and determination to turn Karen's own weapons against her. I started small. The following Tuesday, I positioned my trash bins at exactly 18 inches from the curb, the minimum legal distance that had originally triggered Karen's passive-aggressive commentary. But this time, I surrounded them with solar-powered LED lights, creating what I described in my official HOA notification as enhanced visibility features designed To promote community safety and aesthetic appeal, the lights were technically decorative lighting, which was explicitly allowed under Section 6.3 of the community guidelines. They were solar-powered, making them environmentally responsible in accordance with the HOA's stated commitment to sustainable practices. And they were positioned to illuminate my trash bins like they were featured attractions in a very strange museum. Karen's bins, meanwhile, sat in their usual position without any enhanced lighting features, creating what could be argued was an inconsistent aesthetic that disrupted neighborhood visual harmony. I submitted official paperwork documenting this discrepancy, complete with photographs taken from multiple angles and time-stamped, evidence showing the contrast between my well-lit, clearly visible refuse containers and the inadequately illuminated bins throughout the rest of the neighborhood. That Tuesday night, I watched my security camera feed like I was monitoring a space launch. Karen appeared on schedule, approaching my driveway with her usual determination, but stopped short when she encountered my newly illuminated trash bin installation. The LED lights created a defensive perimeter that transformed my garbage area into something that looked like a landing strip for very small aircraft. Karen stood there for several minutes, clearly calculating whether her usual sabotage tactics would work against bins that were now part of an officially approved lighting display. She circled the installation several times, taking photos from different angles, clearly documenting the situation for future HOA proceedings. But she couldn't bring herself to actually tip over bins that were now classified as community improvement infrastructure. Victory, I thought. Karen had been defeated by her own bureaucratic weapons. I was wrong again.